Final hour of today's edition of the Chad Hasty Show. Joining me on the phones right now from our friends over at the Texas Tribune, it's Patrick Svitek. Patrick, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Chad. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for joining us today. Before we get into some of the Texas legislative news, which, always during the, first few weeks of the legislature, it's quiet, except for this week. It's been a very busy week. I want to get to your story on the Texas Tribune today, and it's about Beto O'Rourke. And apparently you sent out a tweet, I guess it was last night or this morning, about, it appears as though he's found himself. He's good news for Beto. He's no longer an emo. It looks, Patrick, like Beto O'Rourke's coming out of his funk a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, it does. So he went on this road trip outside Texas to some states surrounding Texas, New Mexico, and not surrounding Texas, but Colorado, Kansas, and Oklahoma. And he got back from it, and he finally did his kind of final blog post from the road on late Thursday night. And it sounds like he's kind of out of his funk. He started the whole journey by saying that he had been in and out of a funk recently and was hoping that going on the road would clear his mind, and meeting with some folks in small towns like he did during his Senate race would be clarifying to him. And in his final post, he seems to be coming around and says that kind of learned to listen to other people again, and that he's not focusing on himself, and that he feels kind of optimistic about what he's hearing out on the road. And so it seems like the kind of perfect build-up to a presidential campaign.
Yeah.
And so, we'll see where it goes. But the story that we had this morning is just kind of about actually the suspense surrounding that 2020 decision, regardless of kind of what his takeaways may have been from that road trip. He isn't really telegraphing much about where he's at in this decision-making process. Even some of his close, political allies and supporters are kind of in suspense and waiting to see, what the next signal or cue is going to be from him as it relates to that decision. Obviously, the presidential race has, in the past, just the past few weeks, has taken off in a major way. You've seen, several new candidates get in or form exploratory committees, and so things are moving on without him. And I think there's a sense, at least among some Democrats in places like Iowa and New Hampshire, that he's got to make some moves pretty quickly here.
Yeah, well, and I thought in your piece today, and the headline is Beto O'Rourke ran his 2018 campaign on his own terms. He's looking at 2020 the same way. I think that's a good way of putting it. Is that you look at all the other Democrats so far who have announced. It is, hey, we're going to form an exploratory committee. We're going to go on television somewhere and announce that, and then afterwards we're going to hold a rally somewhere. And everybody's doing that, and it's a good point you bring up that O'Rourke he's not going by the same playbook. Now, whether that's a smart move or not, that remains to be seen. But he didn't do that in a Senate campaign, and he's not going to do it maybe in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, I think based on the what I'm hearing, one of the key considerations he has right now is first and foremost his family, but then he's thinking about how he could run a presidential campaign that would be very similar to his Senate campaign, which, as we all know, didn't really rely on a lot of professional political help, was really kind of driven by the candidate and his wins, for a lack of a better word, and was very kind of close to the people. Him just kind of driving himself into these towns and just walking into a cafe and just start holding a town hall. And so he's trying to figure out, I think, if he can successfully replicate that nationally. And it may be difficult. As you pointed out, a lot of these candidates so far are running very sweet, kind of professionalized campaigns with very meticulous rollouts. They put out the video on the YouTube channel at 9 a.m. They go on MSNBC at 10 a.m. They have a rally, one of the early voting states by that evening. If he were to roll out his campaign, I would be highly skeptical that he would follow that kind of same playbook. I wouldn't be shocked if he just tweeted, "I'm running," and then just started driving himself around the country again.
As someone who has covered the O'Rourke campaign, you've also seen Julian Castro up close and personal, and just as a journalist, and seeing whether it's Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or now Tulsi Gabbard, some of these other Democrats who have announced, what do you think is I hate to put it as a landmine for Beto O'Rourke, but what do you think is something that he has to be careful of right out of the gate when going against some of these other politicians.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was this kind of conventional wisdom that took hold during the Senate race, was that he was this crazy radical liberal, and he certainly had some views that I'd argue were left of center for Texas. But I think that one of the vulnerabilities or one of the challenges he would face in a national Democratic primary is explaining some views or some previous votes he took that would be viewed as too centrist or too moderate. It's just kind of an interesting contrast in terms of how your record is scrutinized when you're running against Ted Cruz in Texas versus running against a bunch of other Democrats in the national primary.
Right.
So I think one of the challenges he may face is kind of fresh scrutiny on some votes and positions that didn't face that kind of scrutiny in the Senate race, because again, he was running against Ted Cruz in a red state. I hope that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting to look at, very interesting to see what he's going to do. Maybe we'll learn when he sits down with Oprah. I mean, that's
right. Yeah.
And that's how we all find ourselves. When we're all in a funk and everything else, we always end up on Oprah's couch, and that's where we eventually find whatever Oprah wants us to do. Let's take a look at the legislative session. Obviously, I think the week news-wise was dominated by Kel Seliger and Dan Patrick not liking each other. But some of the other big news of this week was the House assignments. Talk about the House assignments and maybe what you found was interesting by the House assignments assigned by the new House Speaker, Dennis Bonnen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first assignments, or one of the first things that was announced before those assignments was who the Speaker Pro Tem was going to be, and he chose a Democratic colleague for that, Joe Moody, who's a lawmaker from El Paso. And so right from the beginning of that announcement, he kind of kicked things off with a bang by naming a Speaker Pro Tem, as basically kind of his number two person in the House. Now, it's kind of a, mainly an honorary title, but it certainly kind of signals, who one of the Speaker's top allies is going to be. And that was a job that Dennis Bonnen previously held, Speaker Pro Tem, under the last Speaker, Joe Strauss. And so before there was a Republican in that position, now there's a Democrat.
Yeah.
So that stood out to me. You saw some of these powerful committees, change leadership. For example, you now have, Dave Phelan running the very powerful State Affairs Committee. He's a Republican from Beaumont. The former chair of that committee, Byron Cook, did not seek re-election. And so you have some new kind of power centers, I think, within the House Republican caucus. Dustin Burrows was named, the Lubbock Republican, was named the chair of another powerful committee, the Ways and Means Committee. Burrows is also, this session, he's the chair of the House Republican caucus. And so, he's, quickly accumulating influence and clout in the legislature. And so that'll be another member who's kind of going to be, I think, a new power center under these committee assignments.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like to me West Texas did very well under these House committee assignments, which hasn't always been the case.
Yeah, and I think, quite frankly, a lot of different parts of the state can say that. When Dennis Bonnen's office released these assignments in mass, they included a bullet point list about kind of what they saw as pretty equal representation across geographic and demographic lines as well. And so I think that Dennis Bonnen's team and himself in putting together these committee assignments paid pretty close attention to making sure that different parts of the state were well represented in these assignments.
Yeah, and before we let you go, visiting with Patrick Svitek of the Texas Tribune, are we hearing anything new between the fight between the lieutenant governor and Texas State Senator Kel Seliger?
I am not, and I think that everyone's thankful at this point that that's cooled off for at least maybe the last 24 hours.
Were you surprised?
Kel Seliger, I was not surprised that Dan Patrick sought to have the final word on it. I'm sure you've talked about the interview that he gave the Dallas Morning News, where he kind of escalated things even further, and Kel Seliger declined to comment on that interview. But I was not surprised that, having followed Dan Patrick for the past few years, that he believed he needed to have the kind of final word on this. And as I pointed out, Kel Seliger declined to comment on that interview, and I haven't seen any public statements from him since. And so it seems like for now he's going to not respond in kind.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting week there, and I think it's going to be very interesting to watch and see how those two interact as the Texas Senate spins
right.
in the over the next few months. Hey, Patrick, what are you and your team working on going into next week, and is there anything that you expect on the horizon popping up in the legislature coming up next week?
So, some of these committees, now that they're named, will start having hearings next week. Or on the Senate side, for example, the Finance Committee has already started hearings, and we'll continue to have those hearings, mainly on the budget next week. In terms of major legislative events, I think all eyes now are on the governor's state address, which is going to be February 5th. And that will be an opportunity for the governor to kind of put a finer point on his priorities for the session and lay out maybe a more comprehensive agenda. And so I think that's the next major event on the horizon in Austin.
All right. Very good, Patrick. Keep up the good work over at the Texas Tribune, texastribune.org. And again, I need to ask you one more. Is there any other competitors ready to take on Evan Smith over at the Texas Tribune in ping pong after he destroyed Jonathan Stickland?
I don't think anyone's lined up yet, but I would be very happy to see a series arranged. I wouldn't want that to be just a one-off thing.
Yeah, exactly. I would like to see that. And then when I'm down in Austin, I'm willing to play some ping pong. I don't want to play against Evan. I saw that. I'm not going to do that. But yeah, exactly. I just want to play a round of ping pong. That's all. Hey,
you're always welcome.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it as always. We'll visit with you next week.
Thanks a lot.
That's Patrick Svitek of the Texas Tribune, texastribune.org.